My name's Rick Valenta, and I'm the director of the Sustainable Minerals Institute, and I'm here with Doug Aitken, the director of the Center for Environmental Responsibility in Mining. So we have World Environment Day coming up in June, and we thought we'd take the opportunity to talk a little bit about climate change and the mining industry. But we wanted to start by just saying, Doug, why is this important to you?
Thanks very much, Rick. So this has been a topic that's been important to me for a very long time. I remember learning about climate change back in high school, and we're talking, I think, about 30 years ago, when I learned about increasing temperatures, the impact that would have on society, and I thought, wow, this is something that clearly needs to be addressed and needs to be taken seriously. And really, since then, it's been something that's always been linked to the work that I've done through research at university and subsequent roles in my work in Chile and now here at the SMI. It's just such an important topic, and it's one we really need to get on top of as a society and as the mining industry as well.
Yeah, I think my reasons are sort of similar. I think it's something that is coming down the pike at us, and we're not going to be able to get out of its way. And the potential impact on the mining industry that's regionally based. It's out in the environment. It's out in the area where climate effects can have a profound effect on it. It's a really important necessity to try to come up with ways to mitigate those effects, because we really depend on mining for so many different things. So it's a really and hopefully what we're going to show in the next half an hour or so is why we both think it's so important.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to start with a couple of little scenarios that I've been thinking about. One of those is, let's imagine that we're in November, say 2050, and that you're working in the Pilbara outside in one of the open pit mines in the Pilbara, because it's November of that year. You're in your 60th day where the temperature's been above 45 degrees Celsius, and because of the environment. Because of where we've arrived in the environment, you're working outside, you're wearing an ice jacket in order to be able to work in that sort of environment. But you can only do half-hour shifts, and you have to be with someone else so that they can make sure that you're both okay. So you finish your half-hour shift, you go in, you rest for half an hour, and somebody else or a pair of other people who are job sharing with you go back out and do their half-hour shift, and you're going to do 10 of those in the course of your day working in the mine. And then another scenario that I can see from 2050 is, imagine that you're working in a mine in southeastern Australia, and you're paying really close attention to the temperature and wind forecasts because of the increased instance of catastrophic fire days. It used to be in the 2010s, 2020s, once every couple of years, there would be a catastrophic fire day, or once every 10 or 20 years there might be a really bad season. But now there are 3 or 4 or more catastrophic fire events every year, and you've had to devote enormous energy to trying to understand how to make sure that you mitigate those events, that you preserve the infrastructure of the mine and keep all the people safe associated with it. And everybody's saying, why didn't we plan for this? And this isn't really a fantasy. This is where we're going to be at that time, based on current projections.
I was in a meeting this morning. We're working on a project with a mining company in Chile at the moment. We're developing a methodology to better understand what are all of the risks associated with climate change for operations in specific contexts, and identifying which are the critical risks that they need to be addressing based on the consequences of those risks, and anything from dam failures to drought risks, running out of water, to health and safety impacts to water. And this is where there's some irony, I suppose, in all of this area, is that the mining industry is also crucial to us as a society, addressing climate change in terms of the production of critical minerals that we need for renewable energies, for battery storage, for the energy transition generally. So the irony there is that climate change could actually be what impacts the production of the minerals that we need to address climate change in the future. So it's so important for us. Where do things stand at the moment, and where does it look like where we're going as a society and also in terms of mining?
It's interesting. I was listening to a couple of quotes from Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, and he was saying that climate change is like the perfect problem for which the human race is ideally unsuited, in the sense that it's something where it's something that's really important, but it's sort of abstract and distant and hard to keep your eye on it, and it also, to deal with it, we have to make a sacrifice now for a benefit in the future that might not accrue to us, it might accrue to somebody else. When you look at the consensus now, because we're doing a little bit better, a lot of the predictions are more like high 2s to 3 degrees warming. But when you get to that sort of level, you get to all the kind of disastrous impacts that we're talking about, not only for the mining industry, but for society in general. When you think about all those different scenarios, what it means is that there are 3 scenarios that are potential future scenarios. They all involve transformations. The 1.5 degree scenario, which is already passed, we haven't done the transformation for that. Then the 2 degree scenario, we're not looking like doing the transformation for that. And then the continuing on as we are scenario, and the end result of that is a transformation, but it's going to be an involuntary one. It's going to be one that's kind of forced on us. But I want to come back to the connection between climate change and mining. What do you think are some of those key connections?
So there are connections all over the place between mining and climate change. We already mentioned the importance of mining in terms of addressing climate change, and that's because we need critical minerals for producing batteries, for electric vehicles, for renewable energies, for electrifying many parts of the world that still aren't fully electrified as well. So we have projections at the moment, these are from the International Energy Agency, where we'll need about 4 times the current production of critical minerals in several decades' time. We have a lot of problems producing what we're currently producing in terms of critical minerals, a much higher risk profile overall for the mining industry as a result of the impacts of climate change. It makes mining harder. It makes mining territories more vulnerable as well. So not just the mining industry, but also other actors within those territories, so communities, other industries, agriculture. There's often a lot of connection between agriculture and mining in these areas, and there's a history of conflicts over water use, over contamination, of dust, and many of those points of conflict are expected to get worse with climate change. But there are also virtuous cycles where we can have more collaboration addressing the impacts of climate change between communities, with the mining industry, with local government, focusing where our investment in terms of addressing vulnerability and exposure. And that can look like many different things. It can be investment in infrastructure to reduce the impacts of flooding, for example, or it can be on conservation of ecosystems that are important for reducing the impacts of flooding. There's also an interesting interface there, particularly in terms of ecosystems and restoration and conservation between mitigation, so using those sorts of ecosystems for carbon sequestration, but they also provide that service that can reduce some of the worst impacts of climate change as well. So there's just so much in this area to better understand in terms of the connectivity within the system, and how we can better use that as the mining industry, as societies within mining territories, and also as a global society as well. What are the sort of estimates of costs to the mining industry as a result of climate change?
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to try to turn it into dollar figures, because I think that's what people are are understandably, conscious of when they're trying to decide whether they want to take action on something or not. And it's not surprising to hear that it's pretty difficult to make an estimate of how much climate change is going to cost us between now and 2050. There's been a couple of attempts to look at a tiny piece of that. One that got published late last year by a group of University of Melbourne researchers looking at the very restricted case of copper production in Australia and the cost of increased rainfall to the Australian copper industry between now and 2050. And the number they came up with was 7.5 billion Australian dollars. So not an insignificant number, and presumably one that could be mitigated, an opportunity to reduce that impact if you looked at it. And if you take that $7.5 billion figure and turned it into US dollars, well, that's the impact of the Brumadinho mine disaster. Yeah. In money, of course, the impact in lives is incalculable. Yeah. And obviously can't be quantified, and we would never want to repeat it. But you could imagine the increased rainfall that we'll be seeing and the increased catastrophic rainfall that we'll be seeing, producing potentially more tailings storage facility failures of the type that we had at Brumadinho. So those two tiny little examples, if you extrapolate them out to the entire mining industry across the world, I mean, it's very easy to imagine hundreds of billions of dollars of cost that's on the table. We have the opportunity to try to reduce through measures, maybe even trillions of dollars. So it's a significant problem, not trivial at all for the mining industry. And it's easy to sit here in our commentary chairs and criticize the mining industry, who are really doing their best. But where do you think they are sort of falling short? Where are the opportunities for improvement in the mining industry?
Yeah, so you said they're trying to do their best. I think they're trying. Whether they're trying to do their best at the moment might be debatable in some cases. So I would say that there have been advances in this area in the past decade. It's clearly being taken more seriously by the mining industry. The ICMM, they've put out a lot of guidance in terms of climate change. They're really trying to push the industry to limit the impacts to industry, but also be a better global player with respect to mitigation. But in terms of decarbonisation, I have a feeling that the industry has sort of focused on a few specific solutions, like shifting from diesel trucks to either electric trucks or to hydrogen, and seeing that as that's the solution for us in terms of decarbonisation, where it's a lot more complex than that. Yes, it can be part of the solution. It's great to try and reduce diesel consumption on mine sites, but it's so much more than that. It's about where we're sourcing our electricity from. Yes, it's about switching out different types of fuels, but looking at which are most appropriate, potentially using biofuels as part of that as well. But again, there's a huge amount of complexity in climate change impact risks and how they play off each other. I mentioned the project that we're currently doing in Chile. Effectively, one operation is facing thousands of risks related to climate change, because it can be lots of different aspects of the operation, from the port, from roads, electricity supplies, fuel supplies, direct exposure to things like landslides, avalanches, depending upon where you are. And each of those risks play off each other as well. So you can get risks that are much higher because of the configuration of a mine operation. All of that needs to be understood as much as we can, because if we can start putting in investment from government, from communities, from other industries in the mining industry into addressing some of these critical risks within the territories, that's really where we can make a lot of impact. But I don't see a lot of that action in the industry at the moment. So I think those are the areas where we're falling short a bit. Where where do you think right now that this challenge sits within the hierarchy of challenges in the industry?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and we had a good look at this in the last year or so. I think I already mentioned that as a society, we're kind of turning our backs a little bit on this aspect, but the mining industry is doing the same sort of thing. There are a number of different industry analyses, if you like, of what the major mining risks are. One of the ones that people pay attention to a lot is the EY Annual Mining Risks Survey. Climate change isn't in the top 10 for 2026. It's fell out of the top 10. There's a need for these sorts of things to kind of have a direct connection back to the quarterly results of the company. If we've got when we're doing these things, we want to do it because we've clearly demonstrated the value in the short to medium term to the performance of the company, not through some sort of altruistic desire to to look like we've done the right thing or to get a tick in the right sort of compliance analysis. So it's a challenging time. What do you think climate leadership in the mining industry looks like?
So I think, first of all, it needs the sector to really step up and say, we're going to do this. This is important for us. It's important for the future of the industry. So I would like to see more CEOs from the industry, acknowledging climate change, saying that they want to be climate leaders. What does that look like? Investment. This is costly. You talked about the potential downstream cost to the industry from the impacts of climate change. This is investment upfront to avoid those sorts of downstream costs that they'll have to bear. So I think it's a short-term investment to offset some of those long-term financial risks. New technologies. A lot of the emissions that come from the mining industry come from comminution, for example, from electricity use. It's a very high proportion in mining countries. It can be up to sort of, I think, 7 to 10% in some countries of total national electricity use. So a lot of emissions tend to be associated with that. So what are the technologies that we can introduce to reduce the amount of ore throughput through the comminution circuit? Obviously, we're working on that as an institute, but that needs funding. So there needs to be a continual large amount of funding going into this sort of technology development, and actually it's also its implementation and all of the other interrelated areas of ecosystem conservation, working with communities in creating climate resilience. So it's investment, it's taking it seriously, it's talking about it within organizations as well, making sure everyone understands within the industry that this is important to the companies that we have operating.
So you talked a little bit about the interconnection between all these different things: decarbonization, carbon sequestration, climate resilience, and how there are opportunities there for the industry to combine those. What do you think that sort of interconnectivity looks like in practice?
We've obviously talked a lot about the mining industry itself, but the sector as a whole is much bigger than that. It's the mining providers who are producing machinery, who are producing the electricity for the sector. It's the workers themselves. It's the downstream product producers. And if we don't have a combined approach to addressing this, that it'll be very difficult to actually really make any headway. But I still do feel that the mining industry itself has the opportunity to be the leader in that process, because they're the ones that are effectively connecting all of those other different actors, and they're the ones with a lot of the resources to actually make a change.
But really, when you think about the impacts of climate change, it's not just the connections at that local level. Mm-hmm. Those connections then cascade into a whole range of different connections that reflect the supply chain that could go for, tens, hundreds, thousands of kilometers. So that suddenly the effects of climate change at your mine include or the impacts on your mind of climate change could include the frequency of flooding at a port that the material you produce goes to, or at a port that is producing supplies that come back to you. But it's it's much more complex than just saying, oh well, it's going to rain more here, and therefore we need to build some dams around the operation or something like that. It's there's a necessity for understanding in all that that is far greater than that, and it's a gap right now, I think. But
absolutely.
But we've talked a couple of times now about various different things we're doing. But give us a rundown of some of the things that we are doing in this area.
Okay, so I think as an institute, we're covering climate change from all sorts of different angles. So we have various different centres within the SMI, some that are more focused on mineral processing, geology exploration, and some that are more on the environmental side, the social side, and really the strength is that we have all of them working together on these sort of challenges like climate change. But in terms of specific areas in which we're working, so on the mineral processing side, we have groups that are working on improved mineral processing, so reducing use of energy, use of water, pre-concentration, so identifying where higher concentrations of minerals are so that they can be recovered without having to process the ore that has lower concentrations, so reducing energy use, water use, and emissions associated with that as well. Coarse particle flotation is another area that the Institute's been working on to advance that technology. Again, that's focused on reducing all of the energy requirements in part of the processing stages of mining, which then has an impact upon climate change mitigation. And then more on the environmental side, which is where I sit, we're working on all sorts of areas. We've talked about tools that we've been developing to identify where the risk priorities for the industry. We've been working on technologies that can increase resilience to the impacts of climate change. We developed an optimization software with some partners again, this was in Chile, but it's very applicable to many other jurisdictions, which is software basically to identify what is the optimal water supply system for mining territories. Using desalination plants, using fresh water, so effectively better sharing water resources, so not one part or one water user within a territory should face water scarcity, and it should reduce the costs associated with water supply for different users. We're doing work in carbon sequestration as well, so growth of different types of plants on mine tailings, which can reduce contamination of those sites, but also obviously through their growth allows uptake of carbon dioxide. We have some work in Latin America as well, understanding the emissions associated with land use change in wetlands, so that those can effectively be offset by the company that's affecting those areas. And we have a group working on ecosystem conservation and ecosystem resilience, so monitoring of ecosystems over the life of a mine and understanding how ecosystems can be best be managed to also support carbon sequestration. We have a new group in climate change as well, actually, in the Centre for Environmental Responsibility in Mining, and one of the focuses of the Associate Professor Evelyn Mervyn is mineral carbonation. So it's actually using either mine waste or actually mining for carbon sequestration, so the reaction between mine waste and carbon dioxide to uptake carbon from the atmosphere. So there's a lot of work going on across the whole institute. I think probably what our challenge now is as an institute is really using all of that expertise, the work that's going on, and driving sort of key areas together. So finding those synergies between the different groups, working with our industry partners, and perhaps creating something bigger than what we have in terms of the specific areas that each individual group is working on.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, because all those things connect up to the same problem, and we kind of view our job as being dealing with existential problems, using the sort of grouping of people that we have to try to come at these problems from every important angle. So have you got any further thoughts on how we might realize some of those opportunities?
Yeah, so we talked about what we're doing as an institute and perhaps on the more technical side, but I think what we also need to do, and a responsibility that we have, is now to drive the industry as well. We talked about what leadership looks like. It takes people standing up and saying, this is important for us, and I or we want to do something about this, and we're willing to put in the effort and the investment. And I think, first of all, as an institute, we can show that that's possible. We can be an example of doing that, of addressing this and really putting focus on it as an institute, but then also going through that process with our industry partners as well. So obviously we've got excellent connections into industry, and we can work with them. What does climate leadership look like for them? Where's the impact that they can make? What's the sort of strategy that they need to develop and implement to de-risk themselves as a company, but also to drive positive change within the territories in which they're operating as well. So I think that's really a focal point that we need to have as an institute in really driving that leadership within the industry. So perhaps if we start to summarize, the discussion, where do we leave this? Where do you think we need to be going now, Rick?
I think the next thing that we need to do is take some of these thoughts, but to do what we always do, which is to bring in our the partners that we work with, over 100 different companies and other stakeholders, foundations, and so on, and really bring them into the conversation, but also then to try to put together a program that addresses some of the key gaps in, what do we need to know, what do we need to do better in order to minimize the cost and other serious impact associated with this. So that's something that we're going to be doing in the next little while, and hopefully this sort of conversation is a partial contribution to that.
Yeah. So I just wanted to finish off with a point, and it goes right back to the start of this conversation and how important climate change is, and addressing climate change to both the industry and to society. I remember reading a book that was published about 20 years ago. It was a book called Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air, which was by Professor David J.C. Mackay. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he was a physicist at the University of Cambridge, and the book that he wrote on energy was effectively how to implement the energy transition in the United Kingdom. But his feeling was that this is such an important thing to do in terms of addressing the energy crisis, in terms of addressing climate change. He likened it to the Second World War and the sort of focus, investment and efforts that went into winning the Second World War. And I think we probably need to have that sort of focus and investment in terms of climate change. That's what it's going to take.
It's been great to have a chat about all this. And if anyone listening to this, if you have a comment or want to get in touch, I'm not going to list an email address. If you just go into your search engine, type in UQ SMI, you'll find a way to contact us, and we'd love to hear from you. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for listening.